Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is scrutinize. You might be happy to know there's only one way that this verb is used, and that is to mean to examine or inspect closely and thoroughly. This might be a new word for you, but it is a word that's very common in academic settings. So this verb might be used from a professor to their students or a teacher to his or her students, asking them to look at a particular text or set of data or research and asking them to inspect it closely. Does this make sense? Are there flaws? Are there mistakes? Do you agree with this? And thinking very deeply. Scrutinize is a regular verb. If I want to make the progressive tense, I'm going to drop the E and then add ing to make scrutinizing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by just adding D because this verb already ends in an E. Scrutinize ends in a Z sound, so this past tense ending is going to make a D sound. Scrutinized, scrutinized. You might also be relieved to know that there are no phrasal verbs with this particular verb. So that will allow us to have a little more time to review active voice versus passive voice. And I think for many people who are learning English, they're really accustomed to practicing active voice sentences, especially when they're studying grammar. So an active voice sentence is going to begin with the person or the thing that is responsible for an action, right? Could be for doing it, or if it's an action that's a verb, I should say, that's not really something you can see being done, we say they are responsible for it. So let me give you two examples of simple future active voice sentences. Mike will clean the house. Jen will plant vegetables. I know from these two sentences who is responsible for cleaning. It's Mike. I also know who is responsible for planting. It's Jen. Sentences in the passive voice, though, are going to begin with the person or the thing that is acted on. The person who did the action, or in this case with the future, who will do the action, may not be included in the sentence. Or if that person is included, it's generally going to come at the end of a sentence and we'll use the preposition by right before it. So we can take the first two active sentences and make them passive. The house will be cleaned. Or I might say, the house will be cleaned by Mike. You can say, vegetables will be planted. Or vegetables will be planted by Jen. Many people always wonder, why do we have these two voices? Why make this even more complicated than it already is? But we tend to use passive voice sometimes when the person that's doing the action or that is responsible for the action is unknown. We might also use it when the person doing the action it isn't important to our understanding if we're reading, or to the listener if someone is speaking. Or a third reason is that the writer or speaker really wants to emphasize the object, the person or thing that is acted on. They want our attention to focus there and not be worried about who's doing it. So let's continue practicing simple future with our verb of the day, scrutinize. We'll compare active voice to passive voice. And we're going to focus in active voice with the usage of will and our base verb. And the nice thing about using this form of the future tense is that it's going to stay the same no matter what the subject is. So before I read an affirmative example, I'm going to point out that my passive example is really the same sentence, just changed to be passive voice. So here's an example. Judges understand that the public will scrutinize their decisions. So again, this means the public is going to look closely. Why did the judge decide this? Why did the judge do this versus something else? But the public could also sort of be implied, so it might not be necessary. So what you might hear instead is the passive voice. And to make passive voice in the simple future, we're going to use will, be, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's that same example, but in passive voice. Judges understand that their decisions will be scrutinized. If I want to make negative, simple future in the active voice, I'm going to use will not and then the base verb. You might hear native speakers use the contraction form won't. Let's take a look at an example. Hiring managers won't scrutinize initial applications. So what this sentence means here, they're not going to look really super closely. The process of scrutinizing might come later after interviews, for example. If I want to make that sentence negative in the passive voice, what I'm going to do is follow sort of the same pattern. We're going to use will, not, then we'll have be, and then the participle form of the verb. Initial applications won't be scrutinized. If I want to ask a yes or no question in the active voice, I'm going to start with will, then I'll have my subject, and then the base verb. Here's an example. Will teachers, parents, and students scrutinize the return to learn plan? This sentence might seem funny if you're not in the United States right now, but many schools are coming up with these plans about how do we go back to school when there is a pandemic. And so many of these plans are being called return to learn, meaning returning back to the school building. If I want to take that same sentence and make it passive voice, again, I will start with will, and what comes after that is going to be the object or thing that receives the action. Then we'll have be and the participle form of our verb. So same sentence, but in passive voice. Will the return to learn plan be scrutinized? Next, let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb scrutinize. The first word is the noun form scrutiny. And scrutiny is a critical observation or critical examination. We can hopefully see how the verb and the noun are connected in meaning. Here's an example of scrutiny in a sentence. The budgets of police departments now face greater scrutiny. Another noun that's related and that you might hear is self-scrutiny. So now this, we're sort of turning our examination inward, right? That word there, self, right, is reflective. So here's an example of that. Self-scrutiny means nothing if the awareness doesn't lead to action. I saw this general thought shared in the weeks after George Floyd's death, and as more conversations were had about the discrimination and bias that people of color, particularly Black people, face in the United States. And one author was suggesting here that if you look inside yourself and think about the ways you act and interact with the world, but you don't change, you don't do anything, then it's not, it means nothing. It's worthless. The last word we'll look at today is an adverb, scrutinizingly. And what it means is describing an action that's being done in a scrutinizing way. Another word that's used sometimes closely is attentively. So here's an example of that. The child looked scrutinizingly at her new teacher. You know, this child was checking out this new teacher. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you'll give the verb scrutinize some practice in your writing or your speaking this week. Have a great day.